Well, as part of our pre-regular season activities here on Hittin Season, we want to check in with the teams around the National League East a little bit. And we're going to start off with the Phillies' main rivals, of course, the Atlanta Braves, the team that has had their number in the regular season these last 2 years. But, of course, the Phillies getting their revenge in October each of these last two seasons. But the Atlanta Braves come into 2024 obviously loaded to the hilt. And on paper, it still looks as though they are the team to beat in the National League East. Joining me to talk a little bit about the Braves offseason and how he's feeling about the team entering the 2024 season is Kris Willis, good buddy of the podcast. He's now the senior producer over at Battery Power, which is the SB Nation Atlanta Braves site. They do a lot of good podcasts and stuff over there as well. Kris, thanks for coming back on Hittin Season. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me.
It's good to talk to you again, and anytime we need an Atlanta Braves check-in, you're the guy we come to. And I guess I just want to start off with the Phillies having beaten the Braves in the playoffs each of the last 2 years. I guess it must be really frustrating to go through that regular season, the 162-game gauntlet, as clearly the better team. And I don't think any Phillies fan would argue that the Atlanta Braves on paper these last 2 years have been the better team. Certainly the record has played that out. During the course of the entire 6 months, the Braves had been the more consistent and the better performing team. And then you get into October, and the Braves have come up against a Phillies team that has had their number each of these last two Octobers in very strikingly similar series in 2022 and 2023. What is your reaction to the fact that the Phillies have been able to beat the Braves in these last two postseasons, that regular season where you've proven yourself as the better team only to come up short in October each of these last 2 years?
It seems like the last couple of seasons, the Braves have had something nagging on the pitching side, entering those series. But I don't want to take anything away from the Phillies because, I mean, as you've seen, once you get into a 5-game series, anything can happen. And, I mean, the Braves kind of proved this in 2021 when they entered the postseason and really weren't what anybody considered the best team. They just got hot at the right time. And I felt like the Phillies have done that in a similar way the last couple of seasons. Last year did feel empty a little bit just because the regular season was amazing. They won 104 games, was without Max Fried for a good portion of that season and that thing, but just set every offensive record that you could see. And then, Ronald Acuna, of course, unanimous MVP. To have it in like that was kind of bittersweet. It was left a bitter taste in your mouth, coming out. And I think the team kind of felt that as well. So, we're going to see. I think they've tried to adjust their mindset a little bit, going into this season, and we'll just have to see how that plays out.
Do you buy into the wild card by the fact that, the Braves didn't play in the wild card round and there was that conversation about the rest? And I made the point at the time, the Braves clinched the East so early. They really didn't even have anything to play for over the last week of the season. And then you had that break coming into that series. I look at how the Phillies have traditionally done against Atlanta, and these two teams have played each other pretty evenly over the last few years. But specifically when you get into a short series and you've got Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez going up against Atlanta, those three pitchers have historically always pitched really well against the Atlanta Braves. Zach Wheeler in 27 starts has a 3.18 career ERA against Atlanta, 680 OPS allowed. Aaron Nola in 33 starts has a career 3.40 ERA against the Braves, a 679 OPS allowed. Ranger Suarez, 7 starts, 16 games, a career 3.00 ERA, 650 OPS allowed. And those are the guys who in the postseason, in that 5-game series, the Braves batters have just had all kinds of trouble with these last couple of years. So I look at it as really the Phillies pitching staff matches up with Atlanta better than maybe any other pitching staff in baseball. But I also know that the layoff was a big topic of conversation. So why is it, do you think, the Braves haven't been able to beat the Phillies the last couple of years in the postseason?
I mean, to me, you can make an excuse over the layoff, but I felt like the Braves needed it the last two seasons because they had something nagging at the end of the season. 2 years ago, it was Spencer Strider. Had the oblique injury, missed the end of the season. Obviously, Max Fried got sick at the end of that season, too. And then last year, Fried had the blister issue. Charlie Morton gets hurt right before the postseason, misses the division series. So I really kind of felt like they needed it. They've done they've went the rest approach in 2022. Last year they just rolled right on sim games. They've changed their approach going into the division series. I think it's just one of those things. It's just baseball. And, again, I don't want to discredit the Phillies and say the Braves were just hurt, because the Phillies have come into those two series with an edge about them. As you mentioned, the pitching staff. And, I mean, Ranger Suarez is the one that really jumped out at me, because the Braves murdered left-handed pitchers last year. And, I thought he illustrated kind of their offensive woes, and and then that bullpen. I mean, it seemed like every pitcher Phillies threw out there was throwing 100, or 98, 99, 100, and they just I guess going into last year's division series, if you'd have told me the Braves were going to lose again, I would have told you all the games would have been 9-7, 10-8. To see that offense get shut down the way they did, it was, that was unexpected.
Was it the pressure? Do you buy into maybe the pressure of the moment with the offense? It's because it was really. I mean, I know the Phillies pitchers again have historically done well against these Braves hitters, and that was certainly part of it. We know Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola and Ranger Suarez have been good postseason performers against all the teams they've played essentially these last couple of years. But again, that Atlanta offense, it was really surprising how anemic they were.
I do wonder, when you go in as the favorite and you're probably not wanting to repeat the year before, I think once they lost game one, I do feel like there was a little bit of pressure there. A lot of guys were like, I've got to do something. Everybody was trying to take it upon themselves instead of playing together. I do feel like the pressure kind of mounted, but they pull out game two, and then you're going to Philly, who
we were nervous.
I mean, if you're Atlanta, obviously you didn't want to split one of the first two at home, but you were able to do that in pretty dramatic fashion. It was kind of disappointing to see them, just kind of come back out flat again offensively in game three. But again, I think the Phillies pitching staff had a lot to do with that, bullpen included. I think the Braves spent a good portion of this offseason trying to mimic that Phillies bullpen a little bit, added a bunch of high-velocity arms that I think honestly that's the postseason was in mind, when they were going through that this offseason.
Well, I do want to talk about the offseason now and looking ahead to 2024, because the Braves did make a number of moves, and they were very busy. As I watched them make these moves, none of them really stuck out to me as high-impact players. But, I mean, in the spring game that we saw on Wednesday, Ken Giles, former Phillies farmhand, former 100-mile-an-hour Giles, was throwing 95, 96, but struck out the side. And, I know he's a guy that they brought in. I don't know that there's any great expectations for him, but certainly an encouraging performance here this spring. But I know they added a number of other arms to that bullpen. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the guys that they brought in and how they're expected to help this Braves bullpen do more in 2024?
One thing that really hampered them last year, they were really short on lefty relievers. And they've gone out and got several guys, Aaron Bummer, who, if you look at his numbers last year with the White Sox, he had an ERA nearly a 7, but the peripherals were really good, so I think they're banking on him being able to get back in there. Ray Kerr, they got from San Diego, a little lesser known, but another hard thrower. I think the biggest X factor might be Reynaldo Lopez, who they signed to a multi-year deal. Now they're going to give him an opportunity to start. And he may actually begin the season in the rotation. Hasn't been a starter in a few years, but I really do think that at some point he's going to end up in the bullpen, and I anticipate him being a reliever in the postseason if the Braves get there. So, just more dynamic guys that can pitch high leverage, can pitch in the middle innings if they need to. But the Braves were kind of locked in last year. They didn't have much flexibility in that bullpen, especially after Dylan Lee got hurt. Just short on lefties. A.J. Minter was really the only left-hander they had down there. And none of those guys had options, which really made it tough if you needed to add a fresh arm. So they've got a little more flexibility with this group, and then, like I said, I think a good bit more velocity.
Yeah, the Phillies this offseason, one of the things they really stressed over the last few weeks is bringing in guys with options, kind of swapping some guys off the 40-man roster that were out of options and bringing in a whole slew of pitchers who could be in the rotation, bullpen arms that could travel back and forth between AAA and the majors. That's a big deal during a 162-game season. So some of the little moves you don't often think about that end up actually really helping you during the course of a long season. And the big name that the Atlanta Braves went out and got this year, of course, was Kris Sale. Now, Kris Sale, 7 years ago, Cy Young candidate for sure. Now he's expected to just not be Bryce Elder in Game 3 of the National League Division Series, right? I mean, that was you got all that momentum from the Game 2 and Bryce Elder just didn't have it that day at Citizens Bank Park. And the hope, I'm sure, is that Kris Sale comes in and he can get enough starts, stay healthy enough to be in the rotation for most of the season, but really with an eye on October and a Game 3 start against whoever it might be, but the Phillies in particular. Saw he was throwing 96 this spring already. Just Kris Sale getting it up there a little bit with the velocity, man. Yeah. Save some bullets, but, that's got to be an encouraging sign for you all to have him in the middle of the rotation if he's going to have that kind of heat.
One of the big things he talked about after that trade was how he has been able to have a normal offseason. He said for the first time since really 2019. He's coming in with something to prove. We know what kind of competitor he is. I think at some point the Braves will probably have to protect him from himself because I think he's going to go out there and try to air it out as much as he possibly can. And like you said, it'd be great if he could go out there and recapture some of that magic from earlier in his career. But at the same time, those innings in October are going to be much more important than those innings in April and May. So, I'm really intrigued by it just because of how he's talked about his health and how it just wasn't there. And one thing you can say, when he has been healthy enough to pitch, he's been pretty good. The strikeout rate last year was around 29%, which is pretty close to his career normal. And then, like I said, he hit 97 at his only spring appearance so far. He was already at Northport throwing shortly after the trade. So, we're just going to have to see. I think he's really excited to have a chance to win, and be part of a pennant race and hopefully the postseason. But like you said, we saw the sky high prices for pitching this off season.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't have Kris Sale on my bingo card as somebody that the Braves were going to chase this off season. But, given the circumstances and everything, if he can just slide into that number 3, number 4 spot and then be able to give them good innings in October, they've got a chance, for that to be a pretty rewarding move, I think.
I want to look at the offense now, and there are not a whole lot of additions to the offense. I know Jared Kelenic coming in. There's hope that he can become the type of player that people thought he might be as one of the top prospects in baseball in Seattle. But you look at that lineup, it seemed as though everybody had a career year last year, all at the same time, which makes their playoff loss to the Phillies that much more crushing because I don't know that you can expect to have all of those guys have the same kind of year again. I mean, the team slugged over 500 as a team. All those guys with over 20 home runs. I look at like Orlando Arcia. Eddie Rosario is obviously not back with the team. I mean, is Matt Olson going to hit that many home runs again? I mean, he's going to hit a lot of home runs, but I mean, that was far more than he'd ever hit in his career. Acuna probably has a similar season in him, but I wonder if Atlanta fans are at all concerned or are at all talking about the offense regressing a little bit. Still good, no doubt about it, but not having quite the numbers, quite the season that they had in 2023.
Probably not talking about it as much as they should, just because they set the bar so high last year. And I mean, I look at a guy like Ronald Acuna, you go into those numbers. I mean, Ronald could win the MVP again this year, and he may not ever have approached the season he had last year. I mean, he almost hit 340. I mean, coming into the season, if you'd have told me he was going to hit 300, I would have been, I don't know about that, just because he'd always been a 280, kind of 260 to 280 kind of hitter. But he only struck out 84 times. I mean, the plate discipline, everything just jumped off the table. 149 runs scored, 200 plus hits. I mean, it was just a monster season before you even get to the 40 homers, 70 steals. So, I mean, he's an unbelievable talent. I think he's probably the best player in baseball right now, not named Shohei Ohtani, who's in its own category, obviously.
Yeah, he's a whole other tier.
Right.
Yeah.
Matt Olson, everything clicked together. 40 homers I think is realistic. Anytime you get up into the 50 plus, who knows? It's just kind of special. One guy that didn't have the offensive season was still great was Austin Riley. He kind of dropped back a little bit, but still 37 homers. And then Marcell Ozuna, at this point, I have no idea what to expect, from him. I mean, here's a guy that had 5 hits going on May 1st total and ends up with 40 home runs. So, it was just an unbelievable offensive performance top to bottom. I mean, I don't know that they can be that good again. But, if Max Fried's healthy, if Chris Sale comes through, if the bullpen's a little bit better, maybe they don't have to be, quite at the same level they were last year.
I'm going to ask you for, and maybe not an under-the-radar Braves player, but a Braves player that maybe isn't a household name that Phillies fans you think might see some more of this year, or a name that maybe we're not used to hearing that could play a role on this team that we should be aware of, that when we're playing the Braves, this guy's name is going to pop up every once in a while, and it's not a guy we're used to hearing about.
I mean, the lineup's basically what you see is what you get. I mean, the Braves don't play a whole lot of substituting, as far as their bench, anything like that. Travis d'Arnaud still plays a huge role on this team, though. Sean Murphy, obviously the big trade last year, had a good season, his first season in Atlanta, but, still I think you're going to see Travis d'Arnaud a lot. Travis has become the leader kind of in that clubhouse, even though his role has kind of been reduced a little bit. I know that's not a new guy. AJ Smith-Shawver pitched today. He got a little bit of big league time last year, hit 99 today. I know he gave up a couple of home runs. Braves are still high on him. He'll get an opportunity at some point. And then, really the guy that everybody's kind of buzzing about is the last year's first round pick, Hurston Waldrop. I've seen, he's the one prospect that's gotten consistent top 100 buzz. He was at Florida last year. The Braves drafted him, I think, with the 24th pick. But I think he's got a real chance to be in the majors at some point in this season if they need him. So, there's a name that you might possibly keep an eye on as this season, kind of rolls out.
Yeah, good intel. Very good. All right, last thing for you here. I think everyone who watches this game, who analyzes this game, understands that in the National League you have the Dodgers and the Braves in one tier. I think universally has the Phillies, not universally, but most baseball analysts have the Phillies probably at number 3 in terms of National League. And there's a gap between, I think, the Braves, Dodgers, and where the Phillies are. And then there's the other teams underneath the Phillies. I'm kind of curious how you see the National League stack up, and if the Braves are ahead of the Phillies, which I assume you believe they are, how big is the gap?
I didn't. What it ended up being 14 games, I think, last year. I never really felt like it was that big a gap. I mean, the Braves caught fire, obviously offensively and kind of run through it. But you knew that Phillies team was built for the postseason, especially a short series. So I think on one hand the Braves. I think obviously on paper it's the Braves. It's going to be the Braves and the Dodgers. I mean, that's pretty much what the preseason projections have had. I do think the Phillies are right there in that next tier. I don't think the gap's 14 games, even though I've seen some of these projections are sky high on the Braves now, which is a little scary because that's not happened, historically the last during this run of division titles. A lot of the projection systems have been kind of lukewarm on Atlanta and, projected a much tighter NL East race. But, this Phillies team, like I said, I think what's the most impressive been for me is they're a confident bunch. To me, they're in the image of Bryce Harper. He's got that little bit of he's got that edge that, in the big moment, he's going to come through. And, and I don't really know how you quantify that, but you can certainly see it if you're watching these games and stuff. So I still think this is a good team. They're battle tested. I don't know. I think the Braves are probably better equipped for the regular season, but the Braves have got to find something to get back to find an edge or something to finally cash back in the postseason.
Well, I would certainly like to check in with you during the course of the regular season as these two teams battle it out. It should be a lot of fun watching these guys go at it. And I know everybody's keeping their eyes on October, but let's enjoy the 6 months that lead up to it as well, as we watch two really good baseball teams try and fight for a division title. As I mentioned, make sure you check on everything Kris Willis is doing over at batterypower.com. And you can, of course, check out the Battery Power podcast, learn as much as you can about the Atlanta Braves before we head into the start of the season. Kris, thanks for coming back on Hittin' Season. I really appreciate it.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. It's always a lot of fun. I appreciate it.